Okay. Well, we're going to move on into chapter 4 then, and try to do chapter 4 and the first half of chapter 5 or so. Here we have kind of the conclusion of the crossing of the Jordan River. As you saw in chapter 3, the nation is going to cross the Jordan. Moses, Joshua has led the people across. The priests are there in the middle of the riverbed, just holding the Ark of the Covenant and feet planted in the riverbed. And as long as they stand there, the river waters stay back. So the whole nation is going across. There's no danger of the water harming them or no danger of being flooded out. But as they have crossed, 12 chosen men, one from each tribe, were to go back, after they'd already crossed, go back and take a rock from the Jordan. 12 men, each getting a rock, 12 different stones. And the 12 stones are stacked in the middle of the Jordan where the priests were. And that's kind of to mark, this is where the priests stood. This is where the waters were pushed back, where God did his work in allowing them to cross the Jordan. And then there's some debate among commentators and scholars, because it kind of reads in two different ways there, whether you have two different 12-stone memorials, or whether these 12 stones were then picked up and moved out of the river and taken to Gilgal. I'm kind of inclined to think it's two different ones, but either way, it doesn't make a huge difference here. They take 12 stones from the riverbed of the Jordan, take it to Gilgal, where they're camping, and stack those together. One to represent each tribe of Israel, so that they are able to remember what God has done for them. So let's talk about the concept of a memorial. What is the purpose of a memorial?
Or something.
Yeah, to honor someone or something. Sure. What else?
Remember.
To remember. Why do we need help remembering? We're bad at remembering, aren't we? Right? And nobody was taking pictures there of the Jordan River crossing. This is an amazing event that they're experiencing right then, but the memory is going to fade as time goes on. And so they need to be able to remember for themselves, but also for who else?
Children.
Yeah, future generations, for the children. And it says, when your children ask you, what is the meaning of these stones stacked up here? Then you'll be able to tell them. This is where God pushed the waters of the Jordan River back, where we crossed over, or where our ancestors crossed over, on dry land. So it's a memorial. It's something that is worth remembering because it represents how God gave them entrance into the land, how they were able to cross this impenetrable barrier. Remember that the Canaanites did not believe that anybody was going to cross the flooded river because it's generally a bad idea to try to cross the flooded river. But that's not an obstacle to God. Of course, they can cross the river. They've already crossed an impenetrable water barrier before, right? Or at least their parents did. Where was that? The Red Sea. So we have here a follow-up to the Red Sea crossing that the next generation is going through the same kind of event, these same formative moments to help them establish a covenant with God. So God says, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. There's going to be a lot of emphasis in this first part of Joshua on how important it is for the people to fear God and to remember what God has done for them. And if you remember the context of the previous generation, this is important. Because the previous generation saw the miracles, saw God send plagues upon Egypt, saw and experienced the crossing of the Red Sea, the provision in the wilderness, the miracle after miracle, yet they still failed. And so God is basically giving them this choice. He's saying, you have to do better than your moms and dads did. You have to make a better choice. You need to know and fear the Lord. And we're going to put this memorial up here to represent what I have done for you here today. Israel certainly needed the opportunity to remember, not just for that generation, not just for the generation afterwards, but in the future, generation upon generation, there should be opportunity for them to go to places like Gilgal and to reflect and remember the important thing that happened. We need that kind of constant remembrance to help us remember the sober things that God has done and to be settled in our faith in Him. There are other memorials in the Bible that serve a similar purpose. The rainbow was given as a memorial to represent that God would not destroy the world again with a flood. It was to remember the time that things got so bad that God really did destroy everyone except for those on the ark. And so to this day, when you see a rainbow, it should be to help you remember that God is a just judge and that He's not going to destroy the world in that way again, but we know from lots of other places in Scripture that He is both capable and willing to judge, and He will judge the world again one day by fire. We have the memorial of the Sabbath that they observed. It was to remember how God created the world and then rested on the seventh day. That they would know the power of God and know that all things spring from God. And they were to use that Sabbath day observance as an opportunity of rest for themselves and to let that be a day for the Lord. We don't have the Sabbath day today, but we have another type of memorial that is specific to our covenant, and that's the Lord's Supper. And we observe that once a week to remember how Jesus died for us. And that is an important remembrance, because without Jesus' sacrifice, we don't have forgiveness of sins. We don't have a new covenant to be blessed under. We don't have a reason to be here or a hope of salvation from God. So that memorial is such an important thing to us. And then we know that we do memorials even for things in this world too. Every war that our country's ever experienced, we have memorials to the people who fought in those wars, died in those wars, were injured in those wars, and helping to remember those events of the past. Some memorials are to honor someone or something. Some are cautionary tales of don't let this happen again. Some, they vary depending on exactly what the event is in question. But they serve an important purpose, and they help bring new generations up to speed on the events and the lessons of the past so that we're able to progress in the way that we should. So they have set up this memorial, or they're going to set up the memorial. They have the stones ready to be able to do that when they get to Gilgal. But first, the priests need to finish their crossing. Everyone else has. Everyone's gotten across on the other side, and those 12 men have brought those stones out of the Jordan. And I meant to mention this, but think how amazing it would be to look at that memorial and to tell your children, those stones right there, they were at the bottom of that river that you see. And they're up here on dry land now because of what God did. I think about those things because I see the world through the eyes of my children and how they are in awe over these amazing things that they've never seen before. And that certainly would qualify there in Gilgal. And if it really was two memorials, like I think it might have been, then there would also be the stack of stones sticking up from the Jordan River. And you could point out to the middle of that river and say, see over there? That's where the priests stood. And if you tried to stand there right now, you'd be deep underwater, but then they stood on dry land. And that's the spot where people walked across. So they've gotten all that ready. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, today's a memorial for our country.
Yeah.
And I just watched a survey on that, a guy interviewing young people, and only 1 out of about 30 of them knew what it was about. And I'm saying this because not only did these people obey God and what he said to do, they also, you said about teaching about fear, but they also taught about honor and respect to their children.
Sure.
Because really, kids aren't going to remember something they didn't experience that much. They're going to remember what you taught about it and how to remember it.
Yeah.
And so the same with the Lord's Supper, we teach our children. So that, to me, is a good takeaway from this. Because there's no, in my opinion, there's very little chance of children remembering this stuff if they're not taught.
Sure.
Yeah. We know that in one generation, Deuteronomy, they can completely fall away from God and know God.
Yeah.
So I think, just using the 4th of July as an example, I was sitting there and wow, and it hit me in comparison to this, that, if we don't teach our children about it and teach them to honor, the fear, and the respect, of remembering it, then we will lose them. So that's our responsibility, continue on doing that. Sure. Not just assume they're going to pick it up.
Right. Yeah, and that's why we have memorial. That's why we have things to help remember the past. On our vacation, we went to a World War II aviation museum, which is really interesting. And one of the things that one of the volunteers there was talking about was we're getting further and further removed from World War II, of course, where the people who fought in that war are less and less around. The people whose parents fought in that war are less and less around. And if it's not going to be forgotten, the lessons forgotten from there, then we need to expose younger people to know what that was about, to know what happened there. It's the same kind of thing you're talking about. Even in those secular things, we get the point of that. We see some value there. How much more so for their spiritual memorial here, to remember how God led them into Canaan. That will far outstrip any secular memorial that we observe today or that they observed then. So the priests are there. They're the only ones left in the ark. Joshua tells them, come on up out of the riverbed. They cross over. They get up on the bank, and as soon as they do, the waters returned back to the same flooded state that they were before. So this is very clearly not some fluke, not something that they just took advantage of, seeing that, things got a little dry here. That's not how this works. It's a flooded river. It's going to be flooded for some time, and it's as soon as their feet have left that riverbed that the water all comes back. Lots of parallels to the crossing of the Red Sea. And that's something that they should be thinking about, because the people who are crossing there, they might have experienced the Red Sea as young children, or they would have heard the stories from their parents. And so they're getting basically a replay of that as they cross the Red Sea. One of the interesting things that is stated towards the end of chapter 4 is, that was in verse 14, that says, on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him, just as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. So how was Joshua exalted by God in all of this? Mark?
just in that he's taking the leadership role that was given to him. And when he says to do something, which might sound ludicrous to somebody, go stand in the river.
Yeah.
They do it, and then something happens. God is the one
Yeah.
doing everything.
Right.
And because his word, he's basically a prophet here. Very short-term prophet, go do this, and this will happen right now.
Right. Yeah. So Joshua is giving these commands, and clearly he's filled with the Spirit. Clearly it's God who is working through him. And we see throughout this that some of the things God says, he says just of his own accord, and some of them he says through Joshua. And either way, when he says it, it happens. And so the comparison is very clear, that they are to understand that Joshua will be strengthened by God, and is being strengthened by God to lead them through Canaan. Just as Moses had a special relationship with God, so too does Joshua have a special relationship with God. The parallel is not perfect in that Moses did have a little something that Joshua didn't, but God is very clearly with Joshua. And we talked about this towards the beginning of the book, that this is a transition time for them, and without the leadership of Moses, are they going to be able to get into Canaan? Are they going to be able to seize the land that God has promised to them? This is not an obstacle to God. He can work through whatever leader they have. Whatever leader will follow him. And Joshua is willing to follow God, so this will happen. So the people are getting more and more confidence in Joshua, which is good, because he's about to lead them into battle. They need to have full confidence in him. So that's kind of answering the how and the why. Why Joshua is being exalted so much by God. This is something that the people need, and that Joshua needs to understand the importance of what is coming, to be unified, centered, and for there to be full confidence in Joshua as their leader. Just thought that was an interesting note to make. Anything else you wanted to bring up in chapter 4? Chapter 5 and verse 1 gives us the reaction of the nations around them. So let me ask you, was the crossing of the Jordan River a secret? Was it a secret? The crossing of the Jordan River a secret? No. There are people shaking their heads around here. No, it was not a secret. So it was a surprise, absolutely. They did not expect for Israel to come over the Jordan River. That was a surprise. But it was also not a secret. They crossed the Jordan, and it was known that they were witnessed doing it. And so if there's supposed to be an element of surprise as far as, well, the Israelites have now suddenly appeared in Jericho and nobody knows how they got there, that didn't happen.
It's kind of an interesting contrast of how Pharaoh viewed the opening of the Red Sea and part of the Red Sea, and how these kings viewed part of the Jordan.
Yeah.
The Jordan's not part of it. Nothing. It's just see the Red Sea.
Yeah.
But having just a massive experience.
Sure.
And Pharaoh had no regard for it.
Yeah.
He didn't regard it with any importance.
Mhm.
These kings seeing the Jordan, I found it so frightening that they stepped back from any bravery they must have.
Right. So, yeah, lots of parallels here to the Exodus from Egypt. But you're right in noting that difference, that Pharaoh doesn't seem to even give any consideration to the fact that the Red Sea has parted. These kings do. They're terrified. It says that their hearts melted, there was no longer any spirit in them because of the people of Israel. They knew that Israel crossed the Jordan River. They were not expecting them to do that, but they did see them do that, and they were terrified, as well you would be. That's supposed to be the one safe side during this time of year. So, to me, it makes for some interesting questions in all of this. Because you have a few things going on that appear to be leading us to think that the idea here is a surprise attack. Yet the surprise part kind of keeps failing. So the spies go over to secretly get information about Jericho, and they don't even make it 24 hours before they're found out. So the kings of the area know that Israel is nearby. They know that they're spying out the land and trying to figure out how to attack. That element of surprise is lost. Now, Barry said they weren't anticipating that Israel would cross the Jordan because, well, that's insane. But then when they do cross the Jordan, they see them. And any element of surprise then in not knowing that Israel is going to attack in that direction, now that is gone. So what's the point of all of these kind of secretive actions if the secrets never really pan out? Are these failures?
I think it kind of displays to them, their emphasis on their gods, all the different gods they have for everything. And in all likelihood, they had a god of the Jordan River. And to me, this emphasizes the all-powerful living God. And they don't need the surprise because God's with them, and this is kind of a display of God's power to those kings.
Yes, this is absolutely a display of God's power. It's not meant to be 100% a secret. The crossing of the Jordan, it's not that it was ruined because they were noticed. The intent was for it to be noticed. The surprise was important in shocking them into their hearts being melted and their courage being drained. But the point wasn't just so that they could show up at Jericho and there be no idea that Israel was going to be there. The point was for them to be afraid. The point was for God's power to be displayed. Kathy?
And they were, and they had a lot of time to think about it, because in Joshua 2, with Rahab, she already told them that the people of the land feared them because they heard about what happened at the Red Sea.
Right.
So we already have 40 years of fear going into these people.
Yes. So that's a good parallel as well, because the same kind of language that's used here, of the hearts melting and no longer any spirit in them, that's the same language that Rahab used. She applied that to the people. I don't know if that applied to the kings or not when Rahab said it. It might have. If it didn't then, it certainly does by now. That the kings see, look, this is not just a nation that's out in the wilderness slowly making their way to us. This is a nation that has crossed the Jordan during the flooding season, and now they're coming to attack. So the point has been made. Fear has been struck in their hearts. Now what about we talked about this before, but what about for the spies? Like that's kind of a failure of a spy mission. Why, what was the point of all that?
My question actually is, does it say how the spies across the river?
It doesn't. I was thinking about that when I was preparing this here. It does not say how they
We don't
cross.
know what time of year he crossed.
Sure.
They may have crossed when it's just a trickle.
They might have, yeah. Or they may have gone around. Because remember that going around, if more time had passed, they may have gone around and gone through the hills and the mountains that it would have been expected for them to take.
That's a really hard way to go.
It is a really hard way to go.
But God is merciful, and He wants all to be saved. And if He could take 10 people out of Sodom and Gomorrah, which didn't happen, but He gave the chance,
Mm-hmm.
what about Jericho? He allowed Rahab and her family to be saved.
Right. Yeah, I'm inclined to think that the spy mission was more about Rahab than it was anything else. Right? They didn't really find out a whole lot that we're told. The secrecy of it was blown, but they met Rahab, and she was the one faithful person, one faithful family in that nation, in that city rather, that needed to be saved from the coming destruction. And so that was the way that God chose to do it. Scott?
I haven't really formulated this completely, I don't know if it comes out right, but it's neat to stop and think about all that beginning with Rahab, like Kathy mentioned, those people were already fearing God because of what they'd seen in the past or heard in the past. And so there's a warning starting that there's a God out there that's powerful, that seems to be beyond the power that they've witnessed, anywhere else.
Yeah.
So he's coming. Then these people are starting to arrive, and they're getting closer, and it's like, ooh, this is looking bad. And then the crossing of the Jordan is another big deal. The way that they are going to approach the wall, there's some stuff there too.
Mm-hmm.
But with all of that whole idea of if you could just picture the thoughts of the people and how fearful that would be, and yet they never did really respect the God that is behind all of that. And it's something to us we know about God, we know His power and all that stuff, and who are we? Are we the spies, the people crossing the Jordan, or are we the Jericho going, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
I think I got this covered. I think we're all right. There's a lot of power there, but maybe I'm okay.
Yeah.
It just there's something behind that I think there's that lesson carries forward too. In that, boy, the respect. If you've heard about the power, maybe you should, get on the side of that power.
Yeah. And there you go. There is a difference in just the recognition of the power versus a real response to it. That Rahab is looking for a way to switch sides. And is that not what any seeking person is wanting to do? Of saying, I'm not right with God, and I desperately need for Him to have mercy on me because I need to be right with Him, to be on His side. And even if the knowledge isn't 100% there of knowing exactly how that happens, just the desperation of, I need to be right with God, and I hope there's a way to be right with God. It's like the Acts 2 crowd in being pricked in the heart and saying, men and brethren, what shall we do? They don't know if there's anything that can be done. They're hoping that there is. What shall we do? I want to be right. That's kind of what Rahab was saying. I want to be right with God. Because I know that He's going to win. Barry?
Well, Scott makes a great point. What we're talking about there is the difference between people who have faith and people who don't have faith.
Mm-hmm.
And what a great motivator faith is. We see it in Rahab. It really motivated her to do something entirely different than the rest of her people in that city.
Yeah.
But it also points out to us how, if you don't have faith, how easy it is for you to be just a deer in the headlights.
Yes.
You just get run right over by things that happen in life to you because you have no anchor in faith.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, well, I just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I just hope everything happens or turns out all right, as Scott was talking about there. But that's not the way things work in reality. In reality, faith makes you prepared.
Yeah. So that's like the reaction that I've seen in sometimes. I've experienced this multiple times of people saying, I am very sinful, I have lots of problems, and I know God is angry with me, and then it's just despair. It's just the heart's having melted and saying there's nothing that can be done. I'm going to have to live like this, and God will do with me whatever He's going to do with me. There's no faith there. There's despair and some sort of knowledge of God, but not a faith to seek God and to say, I want to be right. There's a difference. Randy?
One of the things that Mark covered in his class last week is that if you miss the overshadowing of Christ here,
Yeah.
you've missed it all.
Mm-hmm.
Through Christ, His blessings continue through us.
Yeah.
The things that happen can bless people and bless others through us. And we are allowed by all the lessons from faith. But a step further is that if you have faith, God can use and extend His blessings through you. We look at Rahab the harlot. She was in the line of Christ. we see the blessings that because of her faith, God extended through her, God could use her for his good.
Yeah.
We look at the Ethiopian eunuch who knew nothing about Christ, but God knew his heart, nobody else did, on that deserted road where he was converted, and probably also knew that the blessings that he could extend through him as he went back to his native land. And so the bigger picture here is that God uses the faithful to extend his blessings to others.
Yes.
Just like Christ.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, you had your hand up before, I think, and then I forgot to come back to you.
Somebody else covered it.
Okay, sorry about that. Kathy?
I was thinking about something else that pertains to this, looking at it from a Christian attitude about this example. And we could look at this as the power of God and the miracle of this situation, with the water stopping up, and I know a couple of rivers did not go into the Salton Sea like they would usually do, so the people notice all these things. But to us, sometimes the world will say, well, that really wasn't a miracle, that was just an incident in history, and so that kind of covers that. And so talking about the faith, we know that this is a miracle because of certain degrees this way and that way, and the scientific part of it. So it's just one thing to think about it, that we can be sure of our faith, and we can be sure that this is a miracle, and not just, that somebody else can verify something different.
Yeah. That's the over-reliance on, like, everything needs to have a natural explanation, everything needs to have some sort of scientific basis. I heard recently, and I've heard before, I think it's great, if you can believe the first 4 words of the Bible, you can believe anything else that comes afterwards. In the beginning, God. If you believe that there is an all-powerful God who created the world, that there's an all-powerful God who exists in the beginning, then none of these fantastical things that are explained should pose any problem. I can't make the Jordan River part and hold the waters back, and I don't expect for any other man to be able to do that, but I don't have a problem believing that God can do it. My favorite denial of a miracle that I've ever heard was that Jesus didn't walk on the water, he surfed on a little piece of ice. That's how that went, apparently. So, don't think that's how that went down. Okay. We don't have to have a problem believing in the miracles that are in the Bible because we serve an all-powerful God. God was able to sustain them in the wilderness. Is it any less bizarre that he could give them manna for 40 years in the wilderness than it is for him to be able to part the Red Sea? Scott, you had your hand up?
Yeah, along that line, I feel like they're impossible for a reason.
Yeah.
These things are impossible to us for a reason because it seems impossible that God is going to save us, that he's going to forgive us of the things we've done. And then we've got this baptism thing. That's impossible that if I go under that little tank of water and come up, that now all of a sudden my sins are forgiven. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
But with all these stories, he saves, like all these stories saving through water, all of that, over and over and over again. And now we see that, we need to stop limiting God's power. And that's part of our faith, our trust in him to know I really can.
Yeah.
I really can forgive you. I really can take you to a new place. And I really can mature you as a person, as a spiritual being, and as my child.
Yeah.
And because we don't think he can, because we are just too hard to deal with.
Yeah.
And so, it's just neat to put all that together.
Yes.
Like I said, baptism, it's fought a lot, right? And I think we even fight it in our own mind because it's just too simple.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, he does things way beyond what we can imagine. So if he said that's where I'm going to do it, that's where I'm going to do it.
That's a good point to make because the way baptism is fought so often is Well, I mean, you think that water is, washes away sins. Like, I've taken a bath before. Water doesn't do that. You think that act is powerful enough? No. The act is not powerful enough in and of itself. And when you look at all these occasions of how God takes care of his people, saves his people, nothing that they do is powerful enough by itself. When God tells Moses, raise your rod over the Red Sea and it will part, is it the act of raising the rod that really parts the Red Sea? Or is it the response of faith? But if Moses hadn't done it, what do you think would have happened? When Joshua tells them to go out into the Jordan River and, with the Ark of the Covenant, is that really what's going to push the waters back? When later they're going to go to Jericho and they're going to, blow the trumpets and march around this way and that and all these bizarre military things that they do, is that really enough to make the walls of Jericho fall down? The point is that none of it is enough. Without it being a response of faith to God's commands, it's not enough. But God working through us and through these things makes it effective. Barry.
Well, that's the interesting thing about God. God takes these very simple things, the little elements, and through his super working, he creates something phenomenal.
Yes.
He took dirt and created every living physical being that exists on earth.
Yeah.
From just dirt.
Mm-hmm.
So we can see that when he takes someone and they're immersed in water and by faith, that he does a super working there as well and forgives their sins. But it's always from something very simple, like dirt,
Yeah.
that he creates something phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because we serve a powerful God. That is not an obstacle to him, and that is just the way that he works. So the next section of chapter 5 is a consecration. The men are all circumcised here after they've crossed over the Jordan River. Now, question 5 in your book asks, is this a good military strategy to circumcise all of your men right after you've crossed the Jordan and are right outside of the city?
No.
No.
Genesis, we find in Genesis, that's how they took over the Shechemites and destroyed them.
Yeah.
On the third day, they couldn't fight.
Yeah.
Terrible strategy in that sense.
Yeah. It is a right. This is not a logical thing to do from a physical perspective or from a military perspective.
It's okay though, because the kings all fear them at this point, so they're not really concerned about them attacking at this time. They can do this and have it done when they go into the land, because as it says down further, he's rolling away the shame of Egypt from them.
Yes.
So they're going in fully consecrated.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's another reason why the Jordan River crossing wasn't a secret and the kings had this fear in their hearts. It was to allow this time for this to happen. Mark and then Barry? Oh.
I think Brent's point in this question is showing the level of their faith,
Yeah.
going ahead and doing it.
Yes.
And kind of flip it, we've been talking about already, but as far as the other side, when they saw God coming, they had faith, they saw it happening, but they didn't align with God.
Sure.
And they said, get up on the wall, we gotta fight, we have to fight God.
Yeah.
Here the people are saying, no, we need to go with whatever God says.
Yeah. Absolutely. Barry?
Well, if we ask the question, why didn't the nations attack them when these men were unable to fight? Well, first of all, they probably didn't send out flyers saying, hey, we're going to do this. But the other thing is, what we had mentioned before, is they were coming right into the center of the land. And the nations don't know, are they going to go to the north? Or are they going to go to the south?
Yeah.
And every nation wants to let the other nation be the first one to fight it.
Right.
So they can get an assessment of things. And so So they're just laying back and saying, well, okay, what is Israel going to do?
Right. Yeah, that there's a lot of good reasons why it played out the way that it did. But still, to have some faith in God to say, like, couldn't we have done this on the other side of the Jordan, or back in the wilderness somewhere, or maybe wait until after we're done fighting these people? Didn't need to worry about that.
Well, they didn't just go lay back. God commanded them to do it.
Right.
And there's the difference. The thing that I wanted to point out too is that these Amorites on the other side were fearful of God because they saw that God was with the people.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know if they knew that they were getting circumcised.
No, they probably didn't.
Not.
Yeah.
So, but the thing about that crossing and God, them seeing God with them, is that melting of the heart should have caused them repentance.
Yes.
It should have gotten them to react, oh my gosh, this is the God, and He's with these people. That should have struck fear in them. It did.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it lasted.
No. And the fear was directed the wrong way.
But
Yeah.
the point here is God commanded them to do it. He had a reason for commanding them to do
Right.
it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is in the text, the why question here of why are they being circumcised it's only said, well, they're being circumcised because they weren't circumcised in the wilderness before, which is a little bit circular if you don't know like the importance of circumcision. And what Lisa was bringing up before was that this is God rolling back their shame of what happened before. And the shame is that the previous generation failed. God got them out of Egypt, got them into the wilderness, said, I'm leading you to a great land that's going to be your new home. And then that generation got destroyed because they didn't trust in God. Their faith dwindled, they rebelled, and so there was nothing. And there was great shame on them and even shame against the name of God because God has not yet delivered what He promised that He would. That covenant broke down. Now God is going to deliver it, but this covenant needs to be established. Once again, they need to be consecrated and dedicated to God as they're going into the land, because this is a holy war being led by God for them to receive the covenant promise. One very quick thing I want to mention just to close this out is you had 4 days between the crossing of the Jordan, you have the circumcision in that time, 4 days of time for them to rest and heal. Then they observe the Passover. And a really important thing happens here in the Passover. The manna stops. From this point forward, there's no manna. From this point forward, they eat the produce of the land. And that is a transition moment in this nation, in this story, that now they don't have to rely on the miraculous provision, because now there's a taste of the covenant provision. And it's only going to get better. They're at the beginning here only eating some unleavened bread and some roasted grain, some very basic things from the land, but that's going to grow as time goes on for them to experience and enjoy the full bounty of the land that God has given to them. So, thank you, everybody.